Meanwhile, back at the villa, Nasha was saying to Sakiris, "Where are Kafi and Sari? They must have had their supper at Sari's house, but it seems to me that they ought to be back by this time. It's dark." "Oh, they'll be along," said Sakiris absent-mindedly. But they did not come along, and finally Nasha said, "I'm going to send Num after them. I don't like to have them wandering around in the dark on a night like this. They might fall into a ditch and be drowned." So Num was sent running down to the little mud brick house where Sari and Ben and Nemat lived. When he asked for the children, Nemat said, "Why, no, they aren't here. I thought they were at the villa. I haven't seen them all day." She and Ben followed Num back to the villa. When Nasha heard that the children had not been at Sari's house and that no one had seen them since morning, she became very much frightened. When Sakiris remembered something, "It seems to me," he said, "that Kafi came in this morning and said that he and Sari were going off somewhere, but I was reading and I don't remember where." "Oh, Sakiris," said Nasha, "you must remember they may have got caught in the flood if they went far." "Someone must have seen them go," said Sakiris. "Num, go and ask the other slaves." By the time Num had asked about the children and had found that Ani had seen them turn into the temple road, everyone was very concerned indeed, and Nasha and Nemat were crying. Sakiris was as alarmed as the rest, but he gave his orders calmly. Everyone was so eager to start hunting for the missing children that almost before you could count to 10, there was a long line of slaves in front of the villa with torches in their hands. Sakiris took a torch too. He was so worried about the children that he forgot that Egyptian nobles never walked around the countryside. Probably he did not even remember that he owned a litter. Anyway, he started off on foot at the head of the procession. Just about the time they were first missed at home, the water began to lap around the children's feet. They moved farther away from the bank, but the water seemed to be playing tag with them. It came right after them. Kafi really began to be afraid then. "Suppose nobody finds us and the water keeps on getting higher and higher," he thought. He looked around, but there was not even a tree that they could climb. He forgot that he was almost grown up and began to cry, and Sari, seeing his tears, started to cry too. Just then, Kafi heard a faint sound in the distance, as if someone were coming along the dike. He listened, holding his breath. The sounds became louder. It was footsteps! "Sari," he cried, "I hear someone coming." Sari heard the footsteps then too. "Come on, shout so that they'll know we are here," cried Kafi. They shouted at the top of their lungs and kept on shouting. They hardly dared to stop to draw breath for fear they would not be heard. Soon they could see a dark shape coming along the dike. As it came nearer, they saw that it was a litter carried by slaves. There was someone seated in it. They shouted again just as loud as they could. But the swiftly running water in the ditch was making a great deal of noise, so that at first they thought no one was going to hear them. Then, when they had almost given up hope, they heard a man's voice say, "Hark! Did you hear someone shouting?" The voice sounded familiar. The litter dropped, and the children shouted again. "Who's there?" called the voice. "Oserkaf, a son of Sakiris and his slave Sari," Kafi called back. "We are caught by the flood. We can't get across the ditch." They could see the litter being slowly lowered to the ground. The man who had called to them got out. "Kafi and Sari?" asked the voice. "What are you doing here so far from home?" The voice did not sound pleased to find them there, but Kafi didn't care, for he knew now who the man was. "Anotep," he cried, and he was so glad to see someone who could help them that he forgot that he had no love for Anotep. He even forgot that the Nubian had gashed Red Boy's chest. A great deal happened very quickly after that. Anotep's tallest slave made his way down the bank and across the ditch. He took Kafi on his shoulders and carried him through the water to the wall of the dike. Then he went back for Sari. It seemed no time at all before both children were standing safe and sound on the temple road. Anotep made room for them on a chest that he was carrying in his litter. It was a rather hard and joggly seat, but it seemed to the children to be the most comfortable place in the world after the long time they had spent in the wet field. They sat there at Anotep's feet while the slaves made their way down the temple road to the villa. They told him their story. By the time they had finished, they had reached their own gate. There, to Coffee's surprise, Anatep ordered the litter to be set down. I hope you will pardon me if I leave you here instead of taking you to your door, he said politely, but I am still a long way from home, and the flood is rising so fast that I am afraid I shall have the same trouble as you if I do not hurry. Besides, he added, I see men with torches coming to look for you. The procession of slaves led by Sacyrus was indeed nearing the gate. When the children saw it, they quickly said goodbye to Anatep and tired as they were, ran up the road to meet the searchers. They were so eager to tell everybody they were safe that they did not notice how hurriedly Anatep's litter moved down the road. After that, they were soon back at the villa. Everyone was so glad to see them that nobody scolded them for going so far away. When they were clean and dry and warm once more, Num brought in their supper, and while they ate, Sacyrus, Nasha, Ben, and Nemat listened to their story. After they had finished telling their adventure and had told some of them 2 or 3 times, Nasha took Coffee to his room. Ben picked up Sari in his arms, and he and Nemat went back to their little house beyond the garden wall. Coffee was asleep almost before Nasha had left his bedside, but Sacyrus and Nasha stayed up long afterward, talking it all over. If Anatep had not come along just when he did, said Nasha at last, they might have been drowned. Yes, it is lucky for us that he was on that road just then. I must write to him and thank him for doing us so great a service, said Sacyrus. He thought for a moment. Then he said, but doesn't it seem strange to you, Nasha, that he left the children out at our gate and went off without waiting to speak to me? He told Coffee he was afraid of being caught by the flood before he could get home, Nasha reminded him. I don't understand why, said Sacyrus. He can follow the dike all the way to his own gate, just as we can here. Besides, it seems strange to me that any man would be traveling around the country on the first night of the flood. Oh, Sacyrus, said Nasha, probably he didn't know the flood was coming any more than the children did. I think you're very suspicious. We can never be grateful enough to him for rescuing our children. What he happened to be doing is his own affair. Said Sacyrus, I suppose you're right. But from the way he said it, Nasha knew that he was not satisfied.